So for us, in terms of how we funded Headout from its inception all the way till today, it's been quite an exciting journey, and let me kind of break this down into multiple pieces. I think number one for us when we started this was, of course, we had to figure out a way to pay for it ourselves. We had an idea in our head, but we didn't know what exactly that could look like. It was very amorphous, it was not structured, and we had to figure out what that meant. In the initial days, from the time that we decided to make that move to the US, our first few months of living in the US, living expenses, so on and so forth, were all funded by the three of us. We had a small amounts of savings from our previous jobs. We had each worked for anywhere between 1 to 4 years, and we took those savings. It was pretty much all of the money that we had, and that's of course a hard thing to do if you come from a middle class, lower middle class sort of Indian family where savings are a really big thing, especially if you have not seen money, and if your parents are reliant on sort of you to be able to give money back to them and so on and so forth. And I think each one of us had some of those obligations, but we decided that we want to do this because we were really sort of feeling the need to solve this problem and felt really passionate about doing this. Once we had a working product and once we had the initial proof of concept, so to speak, we applied to a bunch of accelerators and we got into 500 startups, which is one of the biggest and one of the most well-known startup accelerators in the US. While I don't recommend an accelerator to every single founder, I think to a first-time founder, especially in a case like ours where we were in a new geography, where we didn't know many people in that sort of country, it was a tremendous asset to be able to join a network like a 500 or a YC or a Techstars, and to be able to piggyback off of that network in terms of building the brand that you have and building the connections that you would like to be able to take your business from 1 to 10. For us, it was an amazing, amazing outcome. So for the first few months, we funded this ourselves. We, of course, lived a very, very truncated lifestyle. We were essentially had a kind of a quota on how much we could spend on our lunch and our dinner. It wasn't pretty. We were living in apartments that I would have never imagined I would be at. I specifically remember in the summer, we were in an apartment in Columbia University where the students who used to live in that apartment were back home because it was summer break. And it was in Columbia, sort of 90th Street, New York. And the kitchen, I probably have visited that kitchen maybe 2 times in the 2 months that we lived there because it was infested with cockroaches. We had about 20 sort of cockroaches that I could see live in front of me. But it was what we had because that's what we could afford. We had 3 airbeds. We didn't want to spend too much on the pillows, so we had airbeds. We had one little sheet, and that was it, right? So I'll talk about how we went about raising funds for Headout from the very scratch. In the beginning, of course, we took our money and used that to be able to move to the US and build a product. We kept our burn rate very low, and we ensured that we gave ourselves enough time to be able to build that initial sort of first few lines of code, get something that's up and running into the real world, get our first traction in terms of suppliers and customers, and get them to match, and then start building the marketplace from that point onwards. At some point during that journey, once we had that initial sort of product up and running, we realized that we now know enough to be able to start talking to some accelerators and see if that's something that we could enter and be a part of. We knew that we were not still a very investable company from a seed round perspective, and seed round in the US would typically mean a few $1 million. We knew that we were not there yet, but we knew that we had enough to be able to join an accelerator, which I think is important in a sense that you need to be able to know who are the right kind of investors for the kind of stage of the business that you are in. So we were honest enough to ourselves to believe that what we really need right now is somebody who will handhold us through the entire process. And an accelerator like a YC or a Techstars or a 500 are people who are really good at doing this day in and day out with a very large number of companies. So we started applying to all 3 of them. We applied to Techstars, we applied to YC, we applied to 500. We got in Techstars and we got in 500 first. We got a call from YC, but by the time we were able to sort of do that conversation, we had an offer from 500, which we had to say sort of a yes to. So we decided that we will go ahead with 500. It was a very famous and a very effective accelerator. We spoke to a few founders who were a part of that of the previous batches, and we had some amazing things to hear. I had met Dave and Pankaj, who was a partner with 500 then in India before we moved to the US, and I had a lot of regard and respect for them as investors and as individuals. And it gave us that confidence to be able to make that move and move from New York to San Francisco, which is where 500 was based. So that's how we made that move into an accelerator. Once we got there, it was a phenomenal 4-month journey. We went from having almost no traction to a few hundreds of thousands of dollars. We were the fastest growing company in the batch. We had a tremendous amount of course, help from the ecosystem, but also I think what it did was it gave us this very specific deadline that 4 months down the line, we are going to be coming out of this accelerator. So we need to make sure that we make a lot of progress in that time period. And it just really sort of gave us that focus and that goal post to be able to work towards. And it was the most intense period in Headout. We were working ridiculous number of hours in a day. We used to, I remember we had phone calls to answer, and we were on the West Coast, and most of our customers at that point were on the East Coast because New York was the only city that we had up and running. So they used to start calling us, let's say 9 a.m. New York time, which was about 6 a.m. in SF. And so we used to wake up at about 5:30 to start answering some of those phone calls, given the fact that we were sleeping at about 3 a.m. the previous night because we were coding or designing or solving some of the other problem. So it was very intense. We were practically living out of the 500 office, and it was just the three of us and one intern, but we were able to execute on the basic principles that we had. We were able to answer the assumptions that we had made and really scale that business from nothing to a few hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, which was a really big validation point, not just for ourselves, but also for everybody around us, in terms of the fact that this is a marketplace that's thriving. It is seeing activity, it is seeing sellers find buyers, and there is that matchmaking and there is that sort of magical moment of connection. So we were quite excited by the progress that we made there. So that was kind of how we took the journey from our sort of pre-seed round, which is what it's called today, which was led by 500 startups as an accelerator, and then made it transform into a $2 million seed round, which gave us the kind of firepower to be able to really go after looking for product market fit. Post that seed round, we raised a Series A of about $10 million, and that was because we have had proof of concept and we have had scale and we have figured out a bunch of things. And so now we take that money to be able to really kind of go from 10 to 100 as a company, right? So I think those were the stages that sort of we went through in terms of going from almost nothing to now being able to run a company which has almost 100 employees and is present in 3 different continents and so on and so forth.